Chosen one, what if I told you that every tear you cried in secret was being recorded by heaven itself? What if the darkest night of your soul wasn't abandonment, but a sacred examination you never knew you were taking? Stop scrolling. This isn't coincidence. This is divine intervention. Have you ever wondered why your pain felt so precise, so targeted, like life was testing you beyond what anyone else could endure? Did you ever cry out to God in the middle of the night, your voice breaking, asking, "Why me, Lord?" only to be met with deafening silence? What if that silence wasn't God turning away, but God leaning in, watching every choice you made when you thought no one was looking? Listen to me carefully. There's a test that heaven gives only to the chosen. It doesn't come with instructions. There's no study guide, no warning bell. One day you're living your life, and suddenly everything crumbles. Your relationships shatter, your dreams collapse, your prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling. And in that moment, that crushing, soul-breaking moment, God isn't asking what you know, He's asking who you are. The divine camera was rolling. Chosen one. Every moment you chose integrity over convenience. Every time you forgave when revenge felt justified. Every night you fell to your knees, broken but still believing. Heaven was recording it all. Not to condemn you, but to crown you. You see, God doesn't need your applause. He needs your obedience. He doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be faithful. And when life stripped everything away, your comfort, your certainty, your support system, you didn't cheat. You didn't cut corners. You didn't sell your soul for an easy way out. That wasn't suffering, beloved. That was your spiritual SAT exam. And you passed with honors. Right now, if your soul has ever whispered those words, "Why me, Lord?" If you've ever felt like God was silent while your world was screaming, type 777 in the comments. This number isn't random. In biblical numerology, 7 represents divine completion, and 777, that's heaven's signature of approval. That's God saying, "Well done, faithful servant." This isn't just a sermon you stumbled upon. This is a summons from the throne room of heaven. Your name was called, your spirit was stirred, and you're here because God has something urgent to tell you about the test you just survived. Before we go deeper into this revelation, I want to thank every single one of you who has supported this message through Super Thanks. Your generosity means more than you know. You're not just donating, you're helping spread light to others who feel alone in their calling. Whether you give or not, I'm deeply grateful for your presence here. Your support, your time, your attention, it all matters. And if this message resonates with your soul, go ahead and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear they passed the test. Because what I'm about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about your struggle. Did you know that God's hardest tests never come with study guides? Have you ever wondered why your most painful season felt like it would never end? What if I told you that the moment you thought God abandoned you was actually when He was watching you closest? Chosen one, let me paint you a picture that will shatter everything you thought you knew about your struggle. There you were, 3 in the morning, face buried in your pillow, tears soaking through the fabric. The house was quiet, but your heart was screaming. You whispered prayers that felt like they were bouncing off the ceiling and falling right back into your lap. Empty, unanswered, cold. You begged God for just one sign, one whisper, one tiny indication that He still cared. But all you heard was silence. That wasn't abandonment, beloved. That was your final exam. You see, when Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Spirit, not dragged, but led, He spent 40 days and 40 nights with no food, no comfort, no crowd cheering Him on. Matthew 4 tells us the devil came when Jesus was at his weakest point, offering shortcuts, easy answers, quick fixes. But Jesus didn't cheat. He didn't take the bait. He passed the test in total isolation, with heaven seemingly silent. Sound familiar? Just like Job, who lost everything, his children, his wealth, his health, and sat in ashes, scraping his sores with broken pottery. His wife told him to curse God and die. His friends accused him of secret sin. But Job never betrayed his integrity. He passed his exam in the darkest hour, when even his prayers felt like they were falling into a void. And Elijah, this mighty prophet who called down fire from heaven, who outran chariots, suddenly found himself under a broom tree, begging God to let him die. He felt so alone, so forgotten. But God wasn't done with him. He was just testing the depth of his devotion when the crowd was gone and the miracles had stopped. You didn't walk through fire, chosen one. You were forged in it. You weren't in delay, you were in divine detox. Let me tell you what really happened during your darkest season. While you thought you were failing, heaven was taking notes. When you chose to tell the truth, even though a little white lie would have saved you embarrassment, God saw that. When your bank account was down to $23, but you still put your tithe in the offering plate, heaven recorded that. When your friend betrayed you, stabbed you in the back, and you still prayed for their success instead of their downfall, angels stood at attention. You showed up for others with a bleeding heart. You smiled at church while dying inside. You encouraged someone else's dreams while yours lay in pieces. You kept your word when breaking it would have been easier. You stayed faithful to your marriage when walking away seemed logical. You honored your parents even when they didn't understand you. Nobody was watching. Nobody was keeping score. Nobody would have blamed you for taking the shortcut. But God was watching, and He was keeping score. You passed not because you had superhuman strength. Lord knows you felt weak as water most days. You passed not because you had perfect faith. There were nights you questioned everything. You passed because you never quit. Because when quitting would have made sense, when giving up would have felt justified, when throwing in the towel would have brought relief, you chose to stay. Heaven doesn't crown the perfect, beloved. It crowns the faithful. Think about it. How many times did you pray with no answer, yet you kept praying? How many times did you choose honesty when no one would have noticed the shortcut? How many times did you show up for others when your own heart was bleeding? That wasn't coincidence. That was your character being tested under pressure. You were taking an exam you didn't even know you were enrolled in. While you thought you were just surviving another day, God was measuring the depth of your integrity. While you felt forgotten and overlooked, heaven was documenting every choice you made when you thought nobody was looking. And here's the shocking truth that will leave you breathless. You passed with flying colors. Not because you were perfect, but because you were persistent. Not because you never doubted, but because you never deserted your post. Not because you felt strong, but because you chose to stay when everything in you wanted to run. The test wasn't about your knowledge of Scripture, though that matters. It wasn't about how loud you could pray or how long you could fast. The test was about who you are when the lights go out, when the crowd goes home, when the applause stops, and it's just you and God in the silence. You didn't cheat your way through. You didn't cut corners. You didn't compromise your values for comfort. You didn't sell your soul for success. You walked through that valley of the shadow of death, and you feared no evil because you knew deep in your bones that God was with you, even when you couldn't feel Him. That exam you thought you were failing, you passed it with honors. That season you thought was wasted, it was your spiritual boot camp. That pain you thought would kill you, it was actually giving birth to the person God always knew you could become. If you're sitting there right now, and your spirit is bearing witness to these words, if you know in your heart that God saw what others missed, that He recorded your faithfulness in the dark comment, "I didn't cheat," below, let heaven know you recognize the test for what it was. Because, chosen one, what I'm about to reveal next will blow your mind about what comes after you pass God's hardest exam. You know what silence sounds like, don't you? Not the peaceful kind, the crushing kind, the kind that follows your desperate prayers, echoing back like an empty promise. You've been there, haven't you? On your knees at 3 a.m., tears streaming down your face, whispering, "God, are you even there?" And the only answer was more silence. But what if I told you that every tear you shed in that darkness wasn't falling to the ground, it was being collected, Psalm 56:8 says something that will revolutionize how you see your pain. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book. Think about that for a moment. The creator of the universe, the God who hung the stars and carved out the Grand Canyon, was so moved by your private pain that he personally collected every tear. Not one drop was wasted. Not one cry went unheard. While you thought you were drowning, God was documenting your devotion. You thought you were being buried, chosen one, but God was planting you. See, there's something about divine silence that the enemy wants you to misunderstand. When heaven goes quiet, it's not because God has abandoned you, it's because he's so focused on your transformation that he can't afford any distractions. Like a master sculptor chiseling away at marble, one wrong move could ruin the masterpiece. So God works in concentrated silence, shaping you with precision that only divine hands possess. Your tears weren't wasted, beloved. They were watering a calling that only the fire could reveal. Look at Moses. For 40 years, he wandered in the wilderness, thinking his purpose had died with that Egyptian he killed. 40 years of silence, 40 years of tending sheep, while feeling like his destiny was buried in the desert sand. But God wasn't ignoring Moses, he was preparing him. Because you can't lead 2 million slaves out of bondage if you haven't first learned to lead yourself out of shame. When that burning bush finally spoke, Moses was ready. Not because the silence had made him bitter, but because it had made him broken enough to be useful. Think about Tyler Perry. Before he became a billionaire filmmaker, he was homeless, sleeping in his 1991 Geo Metro, writing plays that nobody wanted to see. Night after night, sitting in that cramped car, probably wondering if God had forgotten his dreams. But those dark nights in that car weren't his burial, they were his incubation. Every rejection, every empty theater, every moment of silence was God preparing him for a platform that would eventually reach millions. Or consider Mother Teresa. She served the poorest of the poor in Calcutta for decades, often feeling what she called the darkness, a spiritual dryness where God seemed absent. She wrote in her private letters, "I feel just that terrible pain of loss, of God not wanting me." Yet during those very years of spiritual silence, she was becoming a living saint, touching more lives than she could ever imagine. The pattern is undeniable, chosen one. God's greatest servants are forged in the furnace of divine silence. But here's what breaks my heart: so many of you are still waiting for permission to believe that your pain had purpose. You're still questioning whether heaven was really watching when you wept without witnesses. You're still wondering if those midnight prayers, when your voice cracked with desperation, actually reached the throne room of God. Let me end that wondering right now. Heaven was watching. Every sob, every silent scream, every moment you chose faith over fear, when you had every reason to give up, it was all recorded in Heaven's Hall of Fame. If you've wept without witnesses, this is your spiritual confirmation. The God who sees in secret is about to reward you openly. Whisper in the comments, "Heaven was watching." Don't just type it, declare it, because when you acknowledge that your pain had divine purpose, you activate the blessing that comes after silence. But here's what's really going to shake you to your core. The test you just passed wasn't random. It wasn't arbitrary suffering that somehow caught God off guard. No, it was precisely tailored for you, designed with surgical precision to reveal something specific about your character, your calling, your capacity to carry glory. Why was your test so unique? Why did it feel like life was targeting you with laser-focused precision, while others seemed to coast through their days? And what's about to unfold in your life now that you've proven you can be trusted with pain without becoming poisoned by it? Because if God went to that much trouble to test you in private, imagine what he's prepared to promote you to in public. The silence is breaking, chosen one, and what comes next will make every tear worth it. You want to know why your life has been harder than everyone else's, why you've carried burdens that would crush most people, why you've walked through fires that others never even had to face. It wasn't because God was angry with you. It wasn't because you did something wrong. And it certainly wasn't because you were being punished. You were marked, chosen one. And the enemy saw your blueprint before you even knew you had one. Listen to me carefully. There's a spiritual principle most people never understand. The intensity of the attack is always proportional to the greatness of the assignment. The deeper the calling, the fiercer the opposition. The brighter your destiny, the darker the forces that try to snuff it out before it can shine. You think Joseph's brothers threw him in that pit because they were jealous of his coat. That's Sunday school thinking. They threw him in that pit because they saw something in him that terrified them. Dreams, vision, a future that would eclipse their own mediocrity. The pit wasn't punishment, it was positioning. Every betrayal, every false accusation, every night in that Egyptian dungeon was preparing him for a palace he couldn't even imagine. But here's what nobody tells you about being chosen. The enemy doesn't wait for you to figure out your calling before he attacks it. He sees the blueprint in the heavenlies before you even know it exists on earth. He recognizes the threat you pose to his kingdom while you're still trying to figure out your own purpose. That's why your childhood was turbulent when others seemed peaceful. That's why relationships that should have worked fell apart in your hands. That's why opportunities you were perfectly qualified for went to people with half your talent. The enemy wasn't attacking your weakness, he was targeting your strength before it could fully develop. You've been asking the wrong question all these years. You've been asking, why me, God? When you should have been asking, what did the enemy see in me that made him so desperate to destroy me? Because here's the uncomfortable truth that will shake you to your core. You weren't under attack for your past. You were feared for your future. Every tear you cried, every door that slammed shut, every person who walked away, every dream that seemed to die at, wasn't random chaos. It was calculated warfare against a destiny the kingdom of darkness knew was coming. They saw the healer before you knew you could heal. They saw the leader before you knew you could lead. They saw the voice that would awaken millions before you ever believed your words mattered. Think about it. Really think about it. Why would hell waste ammunition on somebody who posed no threat? Why would the forces of darkness orchestrate such systematic opposition against someone who was ordinary? They wouldn't. They don't have time for people who aren't going to make a difference. But you've been on their radar since the day you were born. Not because of what you've done, but because of what you were created to do. David knew this truth. While his brothers were content tending sheep in familiar pastures, David was out there in the wilderness, learning to kill lions and bears with his bare hands. His family thought he was just the youngest, the least likely, the one they forgot to invite to the anointing ceremony. But God knew something they didn't. He was preparing a giant killer. He was forging a king in the caves of Adullam, in the darkness of rejection, in the fire of betrayal by the very king he served. You see, the enemy made a critical miscalculation. He thought if he hit you hard enough, early enough, consistently enough, you'd break. He thought if he isolated you, betrayed you, overwhelmed you, you'd quit. He thought if he made your path painful enough, you'd choose the easy road instead. But he underestimated something crucial. He underestimated the very thing that made you a target in the first place, the unbreakable spirit God placed inside you. The divine DNA that doesn't know how to surrender. The holy fire that burns brighter under pressure. Every attack was actually training. Every wound was building your authority. Every night you cried yourself to sleep was developing the compassion you'd need to heal others. Every time you got back up when staying down would have been easier, was proving to heaven and hell alike that you couldn't be stopped. The enemy's greatest weapon became your greatest strength. His opposition became your training ground. His attempts to destroy you became the very thing that qualified you for the assignment he was trying to prevent. Now do you understand why it's been so hard? Now do you see why your journey looked nothing like anyone else's? You weren't walking the path of the ordinary. You were being prepared for the extraordinary. And here's what should terrify the enemy more than anything. You didn't just survive his attacks, you've been refined by them. You didn't just endure the process, you've been perfected through it. You're not the same person who entered this trial. You're stronger, wiser, more dangerous to darkness than ever before. The mark that made you a target has now become the authority that makes you unstoppable. But listen carefully, chosen one. The test is over. The wilderness season is ending. The preparation phase is complete. But what comes next isn't just reward, it's responsibility. Because now that you know who you are, now that you understand why the battle was so fierce, heaven is asking a crucial question. What are you going to do with the authority you've been given? You thought nobody saw you break. You thought God missed those midnight moments when you collapsed on your bedroom floor, gasping for air through the pain. You believed your silent battles went unnoticed, while everyone else seemed to be living their best life. But chosen one, let me shatter that lie right now. Heaven has been watching, and what you call your darkest hour, God calls your finest moment. What you thought was falling apart was actually falling into place. Every tear that hit that cold floor, every whispered prayer through gritted teeth, every morning you got up when staying down felt easier, heaven was taking notes. You weren't just surviving, beloved. You were graduating. Listen to me carefully. There's a crown that can only be earned in private. It's not made of gold or jewels. It's forged in the fires of unseen faithfulness. And you, dear one, you've been wearing it all along, you just couldn't see it through the tears. The Apostle Peter knew this truth when he wrote in 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 10, "After you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you." Did you catch that? After you have suffered. Not during, not if. AFT. Because suffering with faithfulness isn't punishment, it's promotion. You've walked through invisible fires that would have consumed others. But here's what hell never counted on: you didn't just survive the flame. You became the flame. That burning in your chest isn't pain anymore, chosen one. That's divine fire. That's the anointing that only comes through the pressure. Think about this for a moment. Why do you think your test was so precise, so targeted, so intensely personal? Because God doesn't waste pain on ordinary people. He reserves the refiner's fire for vessels he intends to use powerfully. You weren't being punished. You were being prepared for something so significant that it required this level of strength. David understood this when he wrote Psalm 23. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Notice he didn't say, "if I walk through." He said, "though I walk through," because every chosen one has a valley to cross. But here's the promise: it's a walk through, not a residence. You don't live in the valley, you graduate from it. And graduation day is here. Can you feel it? That shift in the atmosphere around your life. That sudden peace that doesn't make logical sense. Those doors that are starting to crack open after years of being slammed shut. That's not coincidence, beloved. That's confirmation. God is about to validate in public what he witnessed in private. You were not just tested, you were promoted in silence. And what comes next will confirm it in the loudest way possible. But here's what's going to shock you, and I need you to really hear this. Your promotion isn't coming as a reward for your suffering. Your promotion is coming because of who you became in the suffering. God doesn't elevate victims, he elevates victors. And you, chosen one, proved you're a victor when you kept fighting battles nobody could see. The enemy thought he was destroying you, but every arrow he shot was actually forging the very armor you'll wear in your next season. Every lie he whispered about your worth was actually strengthening the voice you'll use to speak truth to a broken world. Every tear he caused was actually watering the very ground where your destiny would bloom. You know what sets you apart from everyone else? They quit when it got hard. You got harder when it got hard. They complained about the pressure. You let the pressure create diamonds. They looked for exits. You looked for endurance. That's not normal strength, beloved. That's supernatural strength. That's the kind of resilience heaven only gives to vessels it intends to use in extraordinary ways. And now listen closely now. You carry something most people will never possess. You carry the authority of someone who's been tested and proven. When you speak, heaven backs your words because heaven watched you earn your voice. When you pray, angels lean in because they witnessed your faithfulness in the fire. When you walk into a room, demons tremble because they remember how you refused to break. You're not the same person who entered that test. You're someone who's been crowned in the secret place. You're wearing invisible armor that can't be penetrated. You carry a peace that can't be disturbed and a joy that can't be stolen. The world is about to see what heaven always knew: you were never meant to be ordinary. So right now, I need you to do something that's going to send shockwaves through the spiritual realm. I need you to say it out loud. Don't whisper it. Don't think it. Declare it. I passed with honor. Say it again, louder. I passed with honor. Now type it in the comments. Post it on your social media. Let hell know you're still standing. Let heaven celebrate you're still believing. Let the world witness you're still here, and you're just getting started. Because this crown you earned in private, it's about to shine in public. And what God is preparing to do through you next will leave no doubt in anyone's mind you were chosen for such a time as this. Are you ready to wear your crown openly? What happens after the test ends, but before the reward arrives? You passed. But the silence after the struggle can feel just as heavy as the battle itself. Chosen one, you're standing in a sacred space right now, like a soldier returning from war, still covered in the dust of battle, your heart still racing from the fight, but now there's this eerie quiet. The storm has passed, but you're still bracing for thunder that never comes. Your spirit knows something has shifted, but your mind hasn't caught up yet. This is the valley between victory and vindication. This is where most people lose their way, not in the test, but in the aftermath. Because when God stops testing you, He starts trusting you. And that transition, beloved, can shake you to your core. You've been conditioned for warfare. Your nervous system has been on high alert for months, maybe years. You've learned to expect the next blow, the next betrayal, the next crisis. But now there's this strange stillness, and your soul doesn't know what to do with peace. Listen to me carefully. In 1 Kings chapter 19, after Elijah called down fire from heaven and defeated the prophets of Baal, he found himself running into the wilderness, exhausted and afraid. He just witnessed one of the greatest miracles in biblical history, yet he was hiding in a cave, asking God to take his life. Why? Because the aftermath of God's power can be more overwhelming than the battle itself. You feel that, don't you? That strange emptiness after the storm, that unsettling quiet where your prayers used to be desperate cries for help. You're not depressed, you're not backsliding, you're in transition. And transition, chosen one, is always uncomfortable. But here's what the enemy doesn't want you to understand. This silence isn't God pulling away from you. This is God positioning you. While you were being tested, you were a student. But now you're being prepared to become the teacher. The weight you feel isn't the weight of failure. It's the weight of authority being placed on your shoulders. You're not the same person who entered that trial. Your capacity has expanded. Your spiritual muscles have been strengthened. Your faith has been forged in fire that would have melted most people's resolve. Think about a master craftsman who's just finished creating a sword. The metal has been heated, hammered, cooled, and sharpened. But there's this moment, this crucial moment where the sword sits in the workshop, gleaming but unused. It's no longer raw metal, but it's not yet in the warrior's hand. That's where you are right now. The question isn't whether you're ready for battle. The question is, are you ready for what comes after the battle? Are you ready for the responsibility that comes with victory? Because God doesn't just deliver people to give them a testimony. He delivers them to give them an assignment. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before God appeared in the burning bush. Not 40 days, 40 years. Can you imagine the silence? the mundane routine of shepherding sheep while carrying the memory of Egyptian royalty. But that wilderness wasn't wasted time, it was preparation time. When God finally spoke, Moses was ready not just to hear God's voice, but to carry God's mission. David was anointed king as a teenager, but he didn't sit on the throne until he was 30. 17 years of waiting, 17 years of wondering if Samuel had made a mistake. 17 years of watching Saul rule while he hid in caves. But every year in those caves was building the character he'd need to rule a kingdom. Your silence isn't delay, beloved. It's divine development. But here's where it gets dangerous. This is the moment when many chosen ones turn back. They mistake the quiet for abandonment. They interpret the lack of crisis as a lack of purpose. They start second-guessing everything they've been through, wondering if it was all just random suffering with no meaning. Don't you dare go backward now. Don't you dare waste the wisdom you've gained by wishing for the comfort you've outgrown. You've been refined for a reason. You've been strengthened for a purpose. And that purpose is about to require everything you've learned in the fire. The next battle isn't with pain, it's with purpose. It's not with suffering, it's with significance. And that battle, chosen one, is far more challenging than anything you've faced so far. Because now the enemy can't attack your faith is bulletproof, so he'll attack your focus. He can't steal your strength, you're too strong now. So he'll try to confuse your calling. This quiet you're experiencing, it's not the end of your story. It's the end of chapter 1. And chapter 2, the chapter where you stop being refined and start being used, that chapter is about to blow your mind. But you have to choose it. You have to step out of the cave of comfort and into the calling of courage. Because the world doesn't need another survivor. The world needs a deliverer. And you, chosen one, have just graduated from surviving to delivering. So let me ask you this. What if this silence isn't God's absence, but God's invitation? What if He's not pulling away, but making room for you to step forward? You thought the hard part was over, didn't you? You survived the wilderness. You endured the silence. You passed the test that broke countless others. And for a moment, just a moment, you believed you could finally breathe. You could finally rest. But here's what nobody tells you about passing God's exam. The moment you graduate from victim to victor, you become a threat to the kingdom of darkness. Chosen one, listen to me very carefully. You were safe in obscurity. When you were broken, bleeding, crying in that dark room with nobody watching, the enemy left you alone. Why? Because broken people don't build kingdoms. Wounded warriors don't lead armies. Defeated souls don't set captives free. But you didn't stay down. You rose, you healed, you found your voice. And now you're dangerous. The enemy couldn't destroy you in the cave, so he's changing his strategy. He's not coming with the same old tricks. Depression, isolation, despair. Those didn't work on you. You've built immunity to that poison. So now he's coming disguised as your blessing. He's wrapping destruction in pretty packages labeled promotion, praise, and applause. This is spiritual warfare 2.0, and most believers don't see it coming. Look at David. When was he safest? When he was a forgotten shepherd boy in the fields, playing his harp to sheep that couldn't applaud. The enemy ignored him completely. But the moment Samuel poured that oil over his head, the moment heaven declared him king, everything changed. Suddenly, Saul wanted him dead. Suddenly, he was running for his life, hiding in caves, dodging spears. David wasn't attacked for being a shepherd. He was hunted for being anointed. Jesus walked in relative peace for 30 years in Nazareth. But the moment he stepped into ministry, the moment he started healing the sick and setting captives free, the religious leaders plotted his death. He wasn't crucified for being a carpenter. He was crucified for being the Messiah. Do you see the pattern? The greater your calling, the greater the warfare. The higher your anointing, the more precise the attacks become. And here's where it gets dangerous for you, chosen one. The enemy has studied your test scores. He knows what didn't work. Poverty couldn't break you. You learned to trust God for provision. Loneliness couldn't crush you, you discovered God's presence in the silence. Betrayal couldn't destroy you, you learned to forgive like Jesus. So now he's switching tactics. Instead of trying to break you down, he's going to try to build you up in all the wrong ways. He's going to offer you shortcuts to success that bypass character development. He's going to send people who worship your gifts but ignore your God. He's going to tempt you with platforms that make you famous but leave you spiritually empty. The enemy knows something most believers don't understand. Pride kills more anointed vessels than persecution ever could. Think about it. How many powerful ministers have fallen not in the valley, but on the mountaintop? How many anointed voices have been silenced not by poverty, but by prosperity? How many chosen ones have lost their way not in the wilderness, but in the spotlight? Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, didn't fall when he was building the temple. He fell when he had everything: wealth, fame, power, 1,000 wives. His heart turned from God, not in hardship, but in abundance. This is why you're feeling more spiritual warfare after your breakthrough than you did during your breakdown. The enemy couldn't defeat you as a student, so now he's trying to corrupt you as a teacher. He couldn't stop you in the test, so now he's trying to poison you in the promotion. Have you noticed it? The attacks feel different now, don't they? They're more sophisticated, more targeted. Before, the enemy came like a roaring lion, trying to devour you with obvious assaults. Now he comes as an angel of light, trying to deceive you with subtle seductions. He's not trying to make you sin anymore. He's trying to make you settle. He's not trying to make you quit. He's trying to make you compromise. He's not trying to break your faith. He's trying to redirect your focus. You might find yourself getting opportunities that feel good but don't feel God. Doors opening that lead to platforms but not to purpose. People wanting to use your gift but not honor your God. Money flowing in ways that make you question whether you still need to pray. Chosen one, if you felt more spiritual warfare after your obedience, if the attacks got more intense after your breakthrough, if you've been wondering why victory feels more dangerous than defeat, type "I'm being tested" again in the comments. This isn't paranoia, this is prophecy. This is heaven's warning system going off in your spirit. Because the enemy knows what many believers don't. A wounded warrior in the valley is manageable, but a healed, whole, anointed vessel walking in their purpose, that's a weapon of mass instruction that can destroy his kingdom and set a generation free. You're not imagining the warfare, beloved. You're walking into it. But here's what the enemy didn't count on: you're not the same person who entered the test. You've been through the fire and came out refined. You've learned to hear God's voice in the silence. You've discovered that your identity isn't found in what you do, but in whose you are. The question isn't whether the enemy will attack your promotion. The question is, will you be ready when he does? Because the same God who protected you in the valley is the same God who will preserve you on the mountain. But this time, the battle isn't just about your survival, it's about your stewardship of the very souls heaven has assigned to your voice. You thought passing the test was the hard part, didn't you? You believed that once you proved your faithfulness in the fire, once you endured the silence and emerged, still believing that the struggle was over, that now you could finally rest in the victory, celebrate the breakthrough, and enjoy the peace you fought so hard to find. But here's what no one tells you about divine promotion. God didn't give you a trophy. He handed you a mantle, and mantles weigh more than medals. You see, chosen one, when heaven recognizes your faithfulness, when God stamps approved on your spiritual transcript, you don't just graduate to comfort, you graduate to responsibility. The very strength that carried you through the storm, now it's required to carry others who are still drowning in theirs. This is where many of God's chosen stumble, not in the valley of testing, but on the mountain of blessing. Because the weight of divine calling is heavier than the weight of divine testing. When you were being tested, you only had to worry about your own faith. Now that you've passed, you're responsible for protecting the faith of those who look up to you. You passed the test in silence. Now, Can you carry the blessing in public? Listen carefully. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, asked God for wisdom instead of wealth. 1 Kings 3-9 tells us he prayed, "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." God was so pleased with this request that he gave Solomon not just wisdom, but riches and honor as well. But here's what happened next. The very wisdom that elevated him became the weight that tested him. Every decision carried the fate of a nation. Every word could build or destroy. The crown on his head wasn't just gold, it was the accumulated prayers of millions of people trusting him to lead them right. Can you feel that weight settling on your shoulders? The prayers of people who don't even know your name yet, but whose lives will be touched by your obedience. Gideon understood this weight. When God called him a mighty warrior in Judges 6:12, Gideon argued. He wasn't afraid of the enemy, he was afraid of the responsibility. He doubted more in his success than in his suffering. Why? Because when you're in the pit, you're only responsible for climbing out. But when God puts you on the platform, you're responsible for pulling others up. This is the divine paradox that breaks lesser vessels. The higher God lifts you, the more souls depend on your stability. Peter learned this the hardest way possible. He walked on water with Jesus. He declared Christ as the Son of the living God. He was part of the inner circle, the chosen among the chosen. But when the pressure of recognition came, when people started looking at him as a leader, he cracked. Matthew 26-69, -75, records his 3 denials not in the darkness of anonymity, but in the firelight of visibility. He didn't deny Christ in secret. He denied him when people were watching. Why am I telling you this? Because the enemy doesn't attack you hardest in the valley, he attacks you hardest on the victory lap. When God promotes you, when doors start opening, when favor starts flowing, that's when the real spiritual warfare begins. Because now you're not just fighting for your own soul, you're fighting for the souls of everyone who believes in what God is doing through you. The crown you're about to receive isn't just a symbol of your victory. It's a commitment to never let that victory make you careless with the hearts God entrusts to your influence. Think about this. Every person who has ever looked up to you, every soul who has drawn strength from your story, every heart that has been encouraged by your endurance, they're all watching to see if your blessing changes your character. Will success make you forget the God who brought you through? Will promotion make you proud? Will the platform make you perform instead of remaining authentic? This is why many of God's chosen feel more pressure after the breakthrough than during the breakdown. In the valley, you could cry without an audience. On the mountain, every tear is analyzed. In the wilderness, you could question God privately. In the promised land, your faith becomes public testimony. The weight is real, chosen one. And it's supposed to be. Because God doesn't elevate people to make them comfortable. He elevates them to make them useful. Your anointing isn't for your enjoyment, it's for others' empowerment. Your breakthrough isn't just your victory, it's proof to someone else that victory is possible. But here's the beautiful truth hidden in this weight. The same God who trusted you with the test trusts you with the blessing. The same strength that carried you through the storm will carry you through the success. The same faith that sustained you in secret will sustain you in the spotlight. You don't have to carry this mantle alone. In fact, you can't. The moment you try to bear the weight of divine calling in your own strength is the moment you start to crack under the pressure. This weight is designed to keep you dependent on God, to remind you that every breath of influence is borrowed, every moment of impact is grace. But here's the question that will determine whether you rise or fall under this divine weight. Will you see this responsibility as a burden or as a sacred honor? Because the world is watching, heaven is recording, and hell is plotting. Your next move doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone God has assigned to your influence. The test was hard, but the testimony, that's going to be even harder to carry. Are you ready for the weight of the blessing? Because ready or not, it's coming. You thought this was about surviving your personal storm, didn't you? You believed this test was designed to break you, humble you, teach you some isolated lesson about faith and endurance. But chosen one, what if I told you that your tears weren't just watering your own soil? What if every sleepless night you endured was actually breaking generational chains that have bound your family for decades? This was never just about you. This test was about your bloodline. Let me paint you a picture that will shake you to your core. Right now, there are children in your family tree, some already born, some yet to come, who were destined to fight the same demons that tormented your grandfather, your mother, your siblings. Generational curses of poverty, addiction, depression, abandonment, spiritual strongholds that have been passed down like heirlooms of hell from one generation to the next. But God saw something in you that broke the pattern. He saw a warrior who wouldn't quit. A soul who would take the hit so others wouldn't have to. You passed so your children won't have to fight the same demons. Think about Moses standing at the Red Sea with 2 million terrified Israelites behind him and Pharaoh's army charging ahead. That wasn't just about Moses getting to the promised land. That was about breaking a 400-year cycle of slavery. One man's obedience liberated an entire nation for generations to come. Exodus 14:21 tells us, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea by a strong east wind all night. One stretch of faith, generational freedom. You are that Moses moment for your family. The late nights you spent on your knees praying through tears, you weren't just crying for yourself. You were interceding for your daughter's future marriage, your son's career, your grandchildren's spiritual inheritance. Every time you chose forgiveness over bitterness, you were literally rewiring your family's DNA. Science tells us that trauma can be passed down through generations, but so can resilience, so can faith, so can breakthrough. You passed so your children won't have to fight the same demons. Look at the lineage of David in Matthew 1. That genealogy doesn't just list names, it chronicles redemption. Rahab the prostitute becomes part of the messianic line. Ruth the foreigner becomes the great-grandmother of kings. Bathsheba, marked by scandal, mothers Solomon the wise. One generation's shame becomes the next generation's strength. Your struggle is writing the same story. Right now, there's a teenager in your family who will never know addiction because you broke that cycle. There's a future grandchild who will grow up with unshakable self-worth because you refused to pass down the insecurities that nearly destroyed you. There's a son or daughter who will build wealth instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck because you learned to trust God's provision in the desert. You're not a survivor. You're a breaker of cycles, a builder of altars, a generational gate. Abraham didn't just believe God for a son, he believed God for nations. Genesis 17:4 records God's promise. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. Abraham's faith didn't just impact Isaac, it shaped Israel. It birthed the Messiah. It changed the entire world. Your faithfulness is that far-reaching. But here's where this gets uncomfortable, and I need you to lean in. The enemy knows what you carry. He knows that your breakthrough isn't just personal, it's generational. That's why the attack was so intense. That's why it felt like hell itself was unleashing everything against you. Satan wasn't just trying to stop you. He was trying to stop your entire bloodline from walking in freedom. The depression that tried to consume you, that was a generational assignment to keep your family in darkness. The financial struggles that nearly broke you, that was hell trying to ensure poverty would continue to plague your lineage. The relationship betrayals that shattered your trust, that was the enemy attempting to pass abandonment issues to your children. But you didn't let him win. You passed so your children won't have to fight the same demons. Joshua 24:15 declares, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua wasn't just making a personal decision, he was establishing a family legacy. He was drawing a line in the sand that would protect generations to come. That's exactly what you did when you refused to quit, when you chose to keep believing when everyone else gave up, when you stayed faithful in the fire. You drew that line. You said, "The cycle stops here. The curse ends with me. My family will know freedom. Can you feel the weight of what you've accomplished? Can you sense the spiritual shift that happened when you passed that test? Generational strongholds crumbled. Ancestral chains snapped. Future bloodlines were liberated because you wouldn't bow to the pressure. Your children will inherit strength instead of struggle. Your grandchildren will inherit favor instead of failure. Your great-grandchildren will inherit purpose instead of pain. You're not just a survivor, you're a breaker of cycles, a builder of altars, a generational gate. The test you passed wasn't just about your character, it was about your legacy. And now, chosen one, you stand at the threshold of the most important assignment of your life. Because what you've broken in the spiritual realm must now be established in the natural realm. If you feel this legacy in your bones, if you can sense the generational weight of what you've accomplished, type "I carry generations" in the comments. This isn't just words, this is your declaration that you understand the magnitude of your calling. But understanding it is only the beginning. Now comes the part where you step into the fullness of what God has prepared for you to build. Chosen one, I need you to pay attention to something that might be confusing you right now. You passed the test. You broke the generational chains. You walked through fire and emerged refined. But now there's a different kind of silence settling over your life. And this silence is making you question everything again. You're asking, God, I thought things would be different now. I thought the breakthrough would be louder. I thought the victory would come with fanfare. But instead you're experiencing something that feels almost like quiet. Not the agonizing silence of abandonment you knew before, but something deeper, something that whispers instead of shouts. Let me tell you what's really happening. God has moved from speaking publicly to whispering intimately. Think about this carefully. When you were in the test, God had to speak through storms, through pain, through circumstances that shook you awake. He had to get your attention through crisis, because that was the only language loud enough to pierce through your panic. But now that you've proven yourself faithful, now that you've graduated from student to trusted servant, heaven has changed its communication style. After you pass the test, heaven moves closer, but it also speaks softer. This isn't regression, beloved. This is promotion. God no longer needs to shout at you from a distance. He can whisper to you up close. The silence you're experiencing isn't God pulling away. It's God pulling you deeper into his confidence. Look at Elijah in 1 Kings 19. This mighty prophet had just called down fire from heaven, defeated 450 prophets of Baal, and watched God demonstrate his power in the most spectacular way. But immediately after this public victory, Elijah found himself running, hiding, questioning everything. And when God met him in the cave, here's what happened. A great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. A gentle whisper. That's how God speaks to his graduates. You see, when you were broken, God had to be dramatic to reach you. He had to use earthquakes and fires and storms because your spiritual ears were clogged with fear and doubt. But now that you're refined, now that you're aligned, now that your spirit is tuned to his frequency, he can communicate in whispers that would be impossible for the untrained ear to hear. This is the most dangerous place to be spiritually, and I need you to understand why. The enemy knows that you've entered God's inner circle. He knows that you're now receiving classified information from heaven. So his strategy has shifted. He's no longer trying to break you with obvious attacks. He's trying to convince you that the whisper isn't real. He's whispering lies like, maybe you imagined it all. Maybe the test wasn't as significant as you thought. Maybe God has moved on to someone else. But chosen one, that doubt is proof of how close you are to something massive. The enemy doesn't waste ammunition on irrelevant targets. Let me give you a real-world example that will blow your mind. Steve Jobs, in his final years, stopped giving big public presentations, and started having small, intimate meetings with his closest team. Why? Because the bigger the vision, the smaller the circle. The more revolutionary the idea, the more carefully it must be protected in its early stages. God is treating you like Steve Jobs treated his inner circle. He's whispering game-changing strategies to you in the quiet, because what he's about to release through you is too powerful to be shouted in public yet. But here's where most people miss it. They mistake the whisper for absence. They think, because God isn't being obvious, he must not be present. They start looking for the fire and earthquake again, not realizing that the gentle whisper carries more power than all the storms combined. The silence you're experiencing right now is holy strategy, not divine delay. God is positioning you for something that requires stealth, not spectacle. He's preparing to move you into territories where the enemy has no advance warning. The whisper is your briefing. The quiet is your preparation room. The stillness is where classified heavenly intelligence is being downloaded into your spirit. Think about Jesus in Matthew 17 on the Mount of Transfiguration. He didn't take the crowds up there. He took Peter, James, and John, his inner circle. And when God spoke from the cloud, he said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." The voice wasn't for the masses. It was for the ones who had proven they could handle intimate revelation. You've proven you can handle intimate revelation. The question is, are you listening? Are you leaning in to catch the whisper? Or are you so busy looking for the earthquake that you're missing the gentle voice that's reshaping your destiny? Chosen one, as we come to the end of this sacred moment together, I want you to carry 3 truths with you that will anchor your soul in the days ahead. First, remember this. The test you survived wasn't random suffering, it was divine preparation. Every tear you cried in secret was seen by heaven. Every moment you chose integrity over convenience, you were writing your spiritual resume. You didn't just endure hardship, you passed an examination that qualified you for kingdom assignments most people will never be trusted with. Second, understand that the silence you're experiencing now isn't God's absence, it's evidence of his intimate presence. He's moved from shouting instructions through storms to whispering strategies in stillness. You've graduated from crisis communication to classified conversations. That gentle voice you've been questioning, that's heaven downloading your next assignment. And third, never forget that your breakthrough has generational impact. You didn't just survive for yourself, you broke cycles that would have bound your children and their children. The demons that tormented your bloodline for generations met their match in your faithfulness. You are a breaker of chains, a builder of altars, a generational gate that swings wide open for those who come after you. But beloved, I need you to know something that goes deeper than any teaching, any revelation, any prophetic word. You are not walking this path alone. The God who saw you through the fire is the same God walking with you in the aftermath. He hasn't brought you this far to abandon you now. His hand is still upon you, his eye is still watching over you, and his plans for you are still unfolding with perfect precision. And beyond God's presence, you have something precious, a community of fellow chosen ones who understand your journey because they've walked similar paths. Right here, in these comments, among these viewers, there are people who know the weight you've carried, the battles you've fought, the victories you've won. You're not isolated in your calling. You're connected to a family of faith that spans continents and generations. As I prepare to pray over you, let me ask you this one penetrating question. Now that you know you've passed the test, now that you understand the silence is strategic, now that you realize your calling is generational, what will you do with this revelation? Will you step boldly into the whispered instructions heaven is giving you? Or will you remain paralyzed by the fear of moving without obvious signs? Let me pray over you now with the authority of someone who has walked this path and seen God's faithfulness in every season. Father God, I lift up every chosen one listening to these words right now. Lord, they have been through fire that would have consumed lesser souls,